Have you ever experienced that moment when, suddenly, everything starts to make sense? When you realize you're dealing with someone whose behavior is more than just difficult, but actually manipulative and deeply insecure? Now imagine this. At the exact moment you gain this clarity, something shifts. They know. Yes, the narcissist knows that you know. This may sound like an intimidating revelation, but here's why it's so crucial to understand this turning point. This video will explore the psychological mechanisms that come into play when a narcissist realizes you've figured out their emotional games. We'll demystify what happens within this complex and often painful dynamic. If you've ever wondered how they manage to detect your subtle changes, even if you don't say anything explicitly, and what the consequences of that are, you're about to find out. More importantly, we'll talk about how this awareness can impact your life and your relationship. Ready to understand the game and, who knows, maybe start rewriting the rules? Stay until the end. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and my purpose with this channel is to show that the problem was never you. If this content resonates with you, like the video and subscribe to our channel. Let's get started. Understanding narcissistic behavior is like unraveling a complex puzzle full of apparent contradictions. These individuals are not just impulsive, they carry an insatiable need for validation and admiration while demonstrating an almost complete inability to feel genuine empathy. But here's something crucial. They are not entirely oblivious to the impact of their actions. They know, at least on some level, that their behavior can be problematic. However, this knowledge doesn't stop them. There's something called the shame and anger spiral that many narcissists experience when confronted with their own flaws. They realize their attitudes might lead to negative consequences, but their impulsiveness and exaggerated sense of entitlement prevent them from changing. It's as if they need to release their thoughts and behaviors to relieve unbearable internal tension. In some situations, especially during therapy, a narcissist might even admit they struggle to control their impulses. They know their behavior can seem absurd or childish, but they also feel they should be forgiven for it. Deep down, there's a voice whispering that maybe they're wrong, but that voice is drowned out by the need to justify everything they do. This creates a fascinating paradox. They know their behavior is toxic, but they continue acting that way because they believe the world should adjust to them. It's not just about ego, it's about emotional survival. For them, giving in would feel like giving up who they truly are. This mindset explains why, even when confronted, they maintain their manipulative patterns. And when someone close starts noticing these patterns, well, that's when things start to intensify. There's a specific moment in any relationship with a narcissist that can be described as the tipping point, the instant when you recognize the patterns. And more importantly, they realize that you've noticed. It's like an invisible dance where neither side is explicitly talking about what's happening, but everything changes subtly. You stop falling into their traps as easily. Maybe you're practicing the gray rock method, keeping your responses neutral, avoiding fueling unnecessary arguments, or letting yourself be shaken by gaslighting. This process isn't something that happens overnight. It's almost imperceptible, both for you and for the narcissist. But gradually, you begin to notice that you're no longer emotionally draining yourself as much. Their threats, "I'm leaving," "let's get a divorce," no longer have the same impact. You're no longer diminishing yourself or blaming yourself for things that clearly aren't your responsibility. This internal shift is powerful, and they sense it in the air. Here's the intriguing part. Despite the lack of empathy that characterizes narcissistic behavior, these individuals are extremely sensitive to their surroundings, especially when they feel they're losing control. They constantly monitor the dynamics of the relationship, looking for signs of disrespect or indifference. When they notice you've stopped reacting the way you used to, something inside them awakens. It's as if you've invaded their most vulnerable territory, exposing their manipulation mechanisms. But beware, this awakening isn't smooth. It comes accompanied by an intensification of toxic behaviors. The reason is simple. The narcissist needs to regain control. They depend on you behaving predictably, feeding their narratives, and providing emotional supply. When that stops happening, they start pushing harder, testing how far they can go to reclaim dominance. This phase can seem frightening because everything seems to get worse before it gets better. But remember, their extreme reaction is actually confirmation that you're on the right path. When the narcissist realizes that you've figured out their games, something inside them starts to destabilize. This awareness triggers an emotional survival mechanism. A desperate attempt to regain the control they feel is slipping away. It's as if they've been exposed in their deepest vulnerability, and this puts them in a state of high alert. The result? An aggressive escalation of toxic behaviors that can feel overwhelming. Imagine an emotional roller coaster. At first, the changes in your behavior are subtle, but to the narcissist, they represent a direct threat to the narrative they've built about the relationship. When you stop reacting to gaslighting or passive-aggressive provocations, the emotional fuel they depended on to validate their self-image begins to dry up. Without this supply, they become anxious and start pushing harder. This can manifest in personal insults, direct attacks on your vulnerabilities, or even constant criticism of your work, appearance, or abilities. This phase is especially painful because it feels like everything gets worse before it gets better. They may start ridiculing things they know are important to you, perhaps dismissing your career, mocking your family, or questioning your decisions. All of this is an attempt to regain the power they feel is slipping away. But here's what few understand. The more intense they become, the more evident it is that they're losing control. This pattern of behavior follows an almost predictable progression. Initially, they try to provoke an intense emotional reaction, something that confirms you're still under their control. When that fails, they raise the stakes. They might throw absurd accusations, make cutting remarks, or even create artificial conflicts. But what's really happening is that they're digging their own downfall. By intensifying their attacks, they're clearly revealing their manipulative intentions. For you, this may feel unbearable, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. When the narcissist realizes none of these tactics are working, they begin to lose strength. This process may take time, but eventually, they come to realize that you're no longer going to give in. It's as if they're at the top of the roller coaster, about to plummet. They may start distancing themselves, seeking new sources of validation, or simply withdrawing because your presence has become a constant reflection of their own flaws. The key here is to understand that this phase, as difficult as it may be, is a clear sign that you're making progress. Every attack, every criticism, every attempt at manipulation is actually confirmation that you're dismantling the control they once had over you. Even without genuine empathy, the narcissist possesses a heightened sensitivity to their surroundings, especially when it comes to threats against their image. This awareness isn't motivated by concern for others, but rather by extreme egocentrism that makes them constantly monitor how they're perceived and treated. For them, every glance, every silence, or subtle change in someone's behavior nearby can be interpreted as a sign of disrespect or rejection. This constant vigilance explains why they can detect subtle changes in you, even if you don't say anything explicitly. When you start emotionally distancing yourself, practicing the gray rock method, or simply stop reacting to their games, they perceive it as a direct threat. It's as if you've invaded their most vulnerable territory, the space where they feel in absolute control of the narrative. This activation of shame is one of the main triggers for the escalation of toxic behaviors we discussed earlier. The narcissist feels they're being manipulated or controlled by you, even though all you're doing is protecting your own emotional space. To them, any sign of indifference or autonomy is interpreted as a direct affront. For example, imagine you start avoiding unnecessary arguments or responding neutrally to provocations. To the narcissist, this is like a loud alarm going off. They're challenging me. They can't see this as a healthy choice on your part. Instead, they view it as an attempt to undermine their authority. This cycle of misinterpretation further fuels the intensity of their reactions, creating an even more tension-filled environment. But here's the crucial point. This hypersensitivity of theirs to external signals is also a weakness. The more you maintain a firm and consistent stance, the less they're able to manipulate your narrative. This forces them to confront their own insecurities, something they've been avoiding at all costs. Reaching the point where the narcissist realizes you've figured out their games can lead to two possible outcomes, both intense and challenging in their own ways. In the first scenario, they may decide to punish you for this shift in the balance of power. This often manifests as an extreme escalation of toxic behaviors, a desperate attempt to regain control. They might use personal attacks, insults, or even subtler manipulations to emotionally destabilize you. This phase is especially difficult because it feels like everything is becoming unbearable. But here's the detail. This extreme reaction is actually a clear sign that you're directly affecting the core of their manipulative behavior. In the second scenario, the narcissist may choose to completely distance themselves. When they realize their tactics aren't working and that your presence constantly triggers their internal shame, they may start seeking new sources of validation. This distancing can initially feel liberating, but it can also bring conflicting emotions, especially if you still hope to repair the relationship. Both paths have something in common. The narcissist is facing an internal crisis. In the first case, they're struggling to maintain control. In the second, they're running from the pain of being confronted with their own flaws. This dynamic creates a curious paradox. Your presence may become so uncomfortable for them that they prefer to avoid you rather than deal with the constant reflection of their insecurity. For you, this can be both liberating and painful. Liberating because there's finally clarity about the pattern of behavior and manipulation. Painful because the consequences of these changes can lead to intense conflicts or even the definitive end of the relationship. However, remember this. Despite how difficult it may be, this process marks the beginning of your own emotional freedom. Now that you understand the impact of a narcissist realizing you've deciphered their games, it's time to talk about how to handle it in a practical and effective way. Remember, the goal here isn't to confront or retaliate, but to protect your emotional health and set clear boundaries. Here are some key strategies for navigating this challenging phase. First, practice the gray rock method. This technique involves keeping your responses neutral and avoiding intense emotional reactions. When the narcissist realizes their provocations aren't having the desired effect, they lose interest in continuing the attack. Brief, direct, and emotionless responses are essential here. For example, if they try to provoke you by saying something like, "You were never good at this," a simple response like, "Noted," may suffice. No arguments, no unnecessary explanations. Second, establish firm boundaries. This means deciding what you will and won't accept in the relationship. If the narcissist crosses a line, whether with insults, manipulation, or emotional blackmail, it's important to clearly communicate that such behavior won't be tolerated. Say something like, "This conversation isn't productive. Let's stop here." And more importantly, stick to your own rules. Consistency is crucial to show that you're in control of your emotional space. Additionally, seek external support. Individual therapy or support groups can be invaluable during this process. A therapist can help you process accumulated emotions and develop tools to deal with the narcissist's emotional attacks. Moreover, talking to others who have gone through similar situations can remind you that you're not alone. However, be prepared for attempts at pathologizing. The narcissist may try to label you as cold, distant, or even socially inadequate when they notice changes in your behavior. Phrases like, "You've been acting strange lately," or "You've changed a lot," are tactics to make you doubt yourself. Ignore these attempts. They're just another way for them to try to regain control. Finally, keep the focus on yourself. This isn't the time to try to change the narcissist or force them to admit their mistakes. Instead, concentrate on your own emotional recovery. Embrace the calm that comes with understanding their behavior pattern and use it as a springboard to build a more authentic and independent life. Understanding narcissistic behavior and how it reacts when it realizes you've figured out its games is an essential step toward reclaiming your emotional autonomy. Although this process can be challenging and, at times, seem unbearable, it also marks the beginning of a new phase, one where you're no longer trapped in the toxic dynamics that once drained you. Remember, temporary discomfort is the price of personal growth. By emotionally distancing yourself and setting clear boundaries, you're building a more authentic and healthier life. If this video brought clarity for you, share it with others who may be facing similar situations. Don't forget to explore other content on this channel and also check the link in the description below to continue your journey of understanding and transformation. Remember, you are light. Never forget to shine.